Good morning. This was supposed to be in the morning, so I wrote good morning on my speech. Though we are consumed with the idea of measuring everything, top 100 most influential people in art, most expensive work sold, best Arab artist, these lists are fickle and confusing. Then you wonder how these lists are made. Who sits in a room and dreams up who is the best curator? It's very individual. I want to discuss conditions of value of art in relation to society. I think that is what makes art authentic. Authenticity is a value. It's an importance that society puts on contemporary art. What I want to examine is a few conditions, historical and legal, that can help us in our assessment of authentic art, and also discuss the conditions that are missing. These missing conditions are the troublemakers. They are the missing groundwork that ensure the security and cultural production. This security will authenticate the production. This means it will result with the connectivity of contemporary art with its producers, receivers, and within a collection. So, about the producers, receivers, and collections. The producers are the ones making art. The receivers are society, which is us. Collections, this always sounds like it has to be bloated with large numbers and expensive works. A collection, in my opinion, is a group of works that are heading somewhere. They are thematic. There are no numbers for how many pieces make a collection. If my theme is to collect a specific artist, clearly this is limited in production. Or let's say I personally like to collect 9/11 work by Arab artists. This is very limited in number. The word authentic immediately draws us to thinking about if the artwork is really by a certain artist or not. Or does it look similar to another work, but there's a kufiya thrown in to add an extra dimension of identity? I'm going to move away from this idea as a method to authenticate work. If something is really by an artist or not, is one way we think about authentic art. But we can also think of authentic art in terms of the process it is made in and subject to conditions. I want to investigate if our contemporary art practices in the region are responding to a reality. The reality of the effect that our inaction is actually promoting the cultural landscape to take on a new form of identity. Often we are not accepting this new look in art. We are pointing at it and saying, that's not art. I'm going to divide the conditions of art into 4 categories. Time, language, context, external and internal forces. If we look at these 4 conditions first, and certainly they are not the only conditions to examine, it will help us think about the idea that our contemporary art practice is in response to a reality that we have created and we continue to justify by our blasé attitude to do anything. Time. To know when something was made helps determine if this was original thinking or something commonly practiced. Materials and the artist's practice should be indicative of this. Certainly, if there is a local newsworthy happening, you will find some artists clamoring to respond to this. The response may seem like a copy-paste situation if we are unaware of the event or the context. But since contemporary art artists share the same education, discourse, critics, funders, and context, we have to remove the emphasis that the end product has to be distinctly different. So what I'm saying exactly is that when 2 works or more may appear suddenly with similarities, I refuse to shout out copy-paste. Language. There are, in fact, parallel productions in art production. So we have 2 tracks. Art that uses Arabic references and art that uses English references. Could there be potentially different outcomes, aesthetics, imagery being produced that move even ever so slightly the balance of a narrative? When we do not speak or understand the language, we remain largely outside of our human experience. Think about how we use gender for an object in Arabic, and in English, gender distinctions for objects do not exist. So in Arabic art, fen is a male gender. In English, it's genderless. How are you thinking about art now, as beauty or the beast? When ma أقدر أجوجل, and I don't have access to post contributions on Google, then I am disengaged. Try Googling the same person in Arabic and in English. I tried it on Walid Raed. Mega artist, thinker, and professor. His contributions to contemporary art are non-negotiable, but you wouldn't know that if you Googled him in Arabic. What about all those salacious comments left on social media that tap into what's on people's minds, otherwise known collectively as public opinion? The role of public opinion in art is huge. Public opinion is a driving force. It can shape, make, or break art. Let's try to diagnose why this happened. We are adopting both the market systems and infrastructure, which is Western-centric in nature, so mainly English-speaking or some same language. While to a great extent, culture in the Arab world relies heavily on the spoken word and calligraphy, our references and starting points are diminishing in accessibility because there is now a prevailing language tide that is rolling into contemporary Arab art. There is more information on Arab art available in English than in Arabic. Also, some cultural workers do not command Arabic as a first language in their practice. Perhaps production has started to show symptoms of translation. Translation here in the context I'm using it is not confined to just language, but in a more broad sense to include methodology and reception, for example. Considering that we don't have many resources on contemporary art as a reference in Arabic as a starting point, working with existing texts and translations can be dangerous territory. There is always the possibility that material is misinterpreted or literal, which results in erroneous production. So a vicious cycle is created here, copying and pasting from wrong sources. And more often than not, contemporary art courses are given in English because of the amount of resource available in English. And if you don't speak English, well, you can go to the British Council and pick some up, or you can watch Friends, but just steer away from homeland. Art handling, art logistics, and insurance of art, it all speaks English. Information on conservation of art, storage, building foundations, and programming around art is mainly communicated in English, which then clashes with local customs. They don't handle art in the same way, no pun intended. Discussion panels will be incorporated of native English speakers or native Arabic speakers. This is so critical since the language we speak does shape the way that we think. I'm giving you this talk in English because I myself stepped into the cosmos of Arab art as a native English speaker and learned how to analyze contemporary art in English. The language I think in defines my orientation, so is it left to right or right to left? How do I observe the work? How do I read the details? And how I describe it in relationship to itself and in relationship to another. Of course, we cannot ignore the role of Western institutions like Ford Foundation, Goethe Institute, Prince Claus, the British Council, among many others who were the frontier funders for contemporary arts. These institutions played a role as game changers to modes of production and topics. These institutions shaped the way we write and think about contemporary art because they made much needed financial grants available for critical thinking. This allowed for an alternative and more adventurous dialogue in subject, and also imposed a mode for producing artwork and was easier to transport, so you have more digital, lightweight work. The outcomes were the kind of art that we react to immediately as, that's not art. It was non-state funders like AFAC and Ashkal Alwan who built a bridge away from painting as a staple art to contemporary arts, as we refer to it today as, that's not art. Which brings us to our third context. I like to visit the work and meet the artist. I actually have no problem if I'm visiting artistic work that looks like it has been carved out of work that is to the north of us, east or west. To me, the emphasis in contemporary art is not so aesthetic-based. Emphasis is on thinking, original thinking. Please bring me the head of the artist. I would like to examine it. It is important to hear the story of the artist. It usually will carry a reference to an experience, an idea, a color, another person, an object, could even be in choice of medium. It's almost an investigation of the artist's self-awareness and consciousness and his relationship to an other. So another issue, person, idea, ideology. Ideologies, education, and friendships could result in what appears to be a copy-paste situation. The influences can create similarities. I also visit with artists for an observation of what may be genuine, be it the artist, the process, the art, the engagement in art itself. This creates an authentic version of the work or the experience. This ideal of authenticity varies. It varies between how the artist connects to himself, how the collector connects to the artist and the work, how museums will collect works. A giant pinch of gut instinct can either have a sale go through or a sale fall through. Note to the dead artists, since you've been gone, we've created a new section in art fairs just for you. You're dead, but we call the section modern instead. Lucky you, no one asks to see you or investigate your practices, your consciousness, or see pictures of your studio. You're not scrutinized like the contemporaries are. More marketable versions of your life are relayed. We will not translate your autobiography or archives into English if you wrote one or had one, because one, we don't have the money to do it, and two, we need to give Western curators the chance to rediscover you for a Tate Modern show. Incidentally, I've been to one of these type of shows. This same artist had small models for a large sculpture. These were proposed to me as door handles for my house several years earlier. Like I said, the modern artists can get away with a lot. Back to those artists still with us and those who aspire to make art. 4. Ooh. We pressed the wrong one. Okay. Compromising the internal space to the external influences is a value to think about. In environments where there are major influences, external controlling factors like patrimony, religion, and now what is becoming prevalent in the Arab world, violence, migration, and occupation, and Western markets hungry for the exotic, another occupation of sorts. Will art production submit or resist to these challenges? Can production and practice retain a degree of consciousness in the region? Can we see nuances in art and artists groomed in order to participate in a Venice Biennale? And at the same time, they grow organically, assuming a social responsibility? I can't go into length on this here because there's a very high degree of spirit and feeling that is so individual. Genuine is one of those feelings I couldn't describe in Arabic or in English. So if artists are producing steady streams of work, then we can safely conclude that there are collectors. It sounds like it's one job title, but it's actually composed of two, which is collecting and caring. In Western societies, the concept or idea of collecting reemerged during the Renaissance, after its lapse in the Middle Ages. I feel like collecting in the Arab world has emerged during our darkest ages. At our most politically insecure time, the number of art collections and spaces for these collections are going upstream. Upstream in that it's a Herculean effort. In the absence of regional legal structures to ensure the continuity of collections and the creation of artist estates, we are allowing our production and reception to continuously be interfered with by foreign bodies. We are not breaking the cycle of work and translation. Note here, artists' estates become the qualified authority on artists' work and protector of the physical and intellectual property of the artist. So at its simplest function, this would be the body to go to if you wanted to check if your work was really by an artist or not. Some collections are registered to for-profit companies in the area. This puts the collection at threat because it is treated as company assets and susceptible to be confiscated and not treated separately from the company. Most get stored at home, and few in the region who have the budget are opting to store works in places that offer them security. These are usually places like London or Liechtenstein. So I'm going to take some time out here. I want to go back to the Venice Biennale artist. Venice Biennale artists are not always citizens of the country they are commissioned by to participate in the Biennale, and chief curators are sometimes exported to national institutions in other countries. The narrowed and confined view of identity and the play of identity politics are complicating contemporary art practices. Minority communities must be able to participate in national exhibitions. By not including them, history becomes distorted. It is important to recognize that in order to be true to both cultural production and reception, one has to be immersed in it. This immersion can't rely on temporary imported consultants and visiting academics open-endedly who lack site-specific knowledge, cannot relate or note the changes in society's patterns, or need to be informed of the specificities of the context. Authenticity in cultural production is threatened by the acceptance of the idea that a stakeholder can be temporary. Culture is about people, the voice of the narrative. In the Arab world, there are many large non-native communities embedded that are neither entitled to legal citizenships nor being incorporated into state histories. Nothing in this major cultural infrastructure that is being built guarantees nor looks into the possibility of offering cultural workers indefinite leave of stay. We must reverse their temporary existence to allow them to be ingrained and socially responsible. I look at high schools a lot. I wonder sometimes that art teachers are only here for a 2-year stay. What talent can they nurture? There is a form of disruption in nurturing talent. The building of a collection that belongs to lifelong, short-term residents in the Gulf. These are people that live in the GCC but are not entitled to becoming citizens, is also disrupted. After looking up synonyms of physical impossibility of collecting when you can't guarantee your own leave of stay, I found nothing, so I defined it as ludicrosity. For all of these years of accumulating, thinking, and analyzing what I could possibly collect, I was only asked 3 times by public institutions to lend works. All have gone west to Poland, Brussels, and the UK. From these interactions and absences came my understanding that my temporality is creating a certain authenticity for my own collection. My collection is now referred to as the collection of Rana Sadik and Samar Yunus, Kuwait. My consciousness tells me that external forces will create a comma somewhere else for the collection. Although art collecting is now a competitive sport, that will be hosted in 2020 as a side competition. Collections will be based on merits like the first, the bestest, the biggest, and the shiniest. There are measures of authenticity even in collecting and collections. Assuming that authenticity is an ideal, it's a self-consciousness, it's being aware of one's centrality in relation to the other, collecting regardless of motive must then be authentic. Authentic in how we collect our art must have a repertoire that is true to us and not to museum boards in New York. Common motives of collection are pride in possession, investment, social responsibility, or passion, which sometimes turn into crimes of passion, overspending, overindulging, overchasing, and wrecking the ability to collect for everyone else. In collecting, it only takes 2 people and a galleryist to make art not financially viable to everyone else. In Arabic, we say irdain haris, but I can't imagine in English how you translate that. In the light of the reliance on Western practices, Western thinking, the English language and foreign investment, by this I mean money from the outside and human resource, and the fact that existing regional structures and mechanisms are not fully empowered, and also our approach to intellectual property and copyright infringement remains in its infantile stage, we are compromising the possibilities for making work that we can identify as authentic. To authenticate a work is also to understand how it is collected, transferred, transmitted, physically, mentally, and electronically. This also describes the added value on its authenticity. Which brings me to think, do we care enough to prioritize building mechanisms and legal structures that safeguard our authentic cultural production? I cannot fix what I have lost, but I can learn from it. How much have we preserved for future generations? What reference points have we established for the future cultural producers to use to authenticate their work? The approach to contemporary arts has to be received with more pragmatism. It's needed now more than ever to resolve outstanding issues like violence and migration and immigration. We want to secure what we are producing in our contemporary culture for future generations to build on, rather than justify our constant need to search elsewhere to validate ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. في أي حد عنده أسئلة؟
Locally, how important do you think art education is, and where does art education in Kuwait stand with all of this information about art?
Which is a really good question. I went to an American school, so we studied at school American art. And when I was writing this talk, I was telling my son about it. And he said, why are you not giving references about Arab artists? And I said to him, the problem is the kids are not studying Arab art at schools. So they're not going to be able to relate to what I'm talking about. So I had to find something to use in this presentation that probably everybody in this room automatically connected with. But had I used an Arabic artist, you know, it might have been different to different groups of people. Like some people might not understand the reference of that artist or who he is or so on. But I think everybody in here got Andy Warhol, right?
Yeah.
Super.
Great.
So yeah, 100%, there should be art in schools. And the teachers should be allowed to stay in the schools throughout the career of the students. They need to identify talent.
How much are artists and curators and people who collect engaging with the media so that the message really goes out in a big way?
Oh, so is it my message or someone else's message?
Well, yours and
I think I have a very, I think I have a message that is still not out yet regarding immigration, violence, occupation, and these things.
No, I mean like collections and how to preserve them and the importance of.
Oh yeah, I think
because
collectors
I think there's something lacking in terms of media coverage, because a lot of journalists don't understand the terms. To them, it's very abstract, and then you can throw out anything at them, and they'll just copy paste what you say.
Yeah.
But without having the concept sink in.
Yeah. I agree, but I didn't know if you meant in Arabic or in English, because, like I said, in Arabic, conservation of art is way behind. The practice of it is it's not familiar yet. I must have one more friend out there. One more. That's it. Call it a day. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Rana.
Thank you.